So I wanted to go over some tanking situations for TBC before all the gear and rating systems reset for pre-patch tomorrow for Wrath. I wanted to basically go over my original thoughts of how I received tanking at the beginning of TBC to where we're at now. First off is overall tanking for each of the classes. I personally felt like you needed all three Paladin, Warrior, Druid for the entirety of the expansion, even through Sunwell. Unless you're in a speedrunning guild and a parsing guild that only cares about seeing the best numbers possible for your respective class, then double feral Pally tank for Sunwell was absolutely viable. But I will go on record and say that Warriors, I feel like, were not as bad of tank through this entire expansion as everyone gave them credit for, even through the later phases. I felt like they had better openers. They got to expertise cap quicker than Druids do. I think Druids only get to like 8-ish% expertise, whereas Warriors can essentially get to basically, I can be expertise capped. This is just gear set right now, but in my threat gear, I have 13.5%, so I have a 0.5% chance to be parried. So I feel like just overall, Warriors got the shaft of hate for the tail end of the expansion, Black Temple and Sunwell specifically, when I feel like they were not at that level. It was just people regurgitating what they heard online, not understanding how the class works at all. And generally, Warriors are the harder tank to play for just the general player. So they just have a bad rap of being bad because that's all people see in pugs or out in the wild. People don't know really necessarily how to gear them, because you can't just gear them as a full defense, dodge, parry, avoidance tank with no threat gear or anything mixed in. Paladins have been amazing since day one. I absolutely think they could have been a main tank. In the earlier phases, they lacked hit rating, so they suffered a lot from not being able to land their judgments reliably, or even their holy shield block charges could get resisted as well. Later on, they got hit gear on their plate, which was more or less a very wanted addition, but it was kind of too late at that point. They would drop their Avengers Shield talent for Sanctity Aura for just 10% holy damage unless they had a Holy Paladin pick it up for them. So they really weren't throwing anything that could get resisted, and Consecrate would just carry them because only the initial poof of the initial Consecrate poof would be the only thing that could be resisted. The rest of it landed no matter what. So they just fed the Consecrate for the damage, and that's fine. Which is the role they filled, was the AoE tank. Unfortunately, that meant their snap threat was absolute dog water because they only had Judgment. Their Judgment of Righteousness was their only snap threat if they did go down that avenue. Which was unfortunate, but that was the role they filled until they got hit later on. But they absolutely can tank everything a Warrior and Bear can. Hell, even now in Sunwell, if they get to Exercise, they can have insane snap threat if it crits and everything lands. So Paladin's still great. It sucks that they have reduced health and avoidance compared to Bears and Warriors, just baseline, but that all gets normalized. Bears, again, just like Warriors, they've been perfect the entire time. They lacked in phase 1 and 2 for the same exact reasons Warriors did. There was no hit, no expertise on any tank gear. They had to mix in some crazy DPS trinkets to catch up. I feel like they lacked a little bit more in the early phases just because they didn't have any powerful tiers, and Warriors just had access to Heroic Strike going to your weapon speed instead of Maul being baselined at 2.5 weapon speed or 2.5 swing speed, regardless of you couldn't modify it outside of haste, which didn't come into play until way later in phase 3 or phase 5. Bears are great. They definitely held their own. I would always be able to race with my druid tanking buddy throughout the whole expansion. We would keep up. They have a little worse of an opener because they can't get their expertise to the point that warriors can, or their speed even through a lot of haste stacking. So if they got a maul dodge parried or missed, if they weren't hit capped, it was devastating. They basically just sat there and just watched the mob just lose threat. They had to wait 2.5 seconds before they could maul again, especially if Mangle missed or dodged parry as well. It was just GG for them. Like, it was rough starting out for Bears just because of that expertise and hit loss, but they did scale insanely through avoidance, and basically all their gear was DPS gear because they would be armor capped near Black Temple and Sunwell, and all their gear just had insane amounts of strength and agi and just raw stats that they just scaled exponentially with. So definitely Bears were the quote-unquote king in the later phases just because they gave the party 5% crit, but I feel like Warriors still contested as well. So going on for gear, this is was my normal setup of my avenue. It was more or less like I had to have threat gear. I could not be a full avoidance tank. I couldn't just sit back and just put as tanky as stuff on as I wanted, because there was a lot of fights where our druid tank would DPS, and if anyone knows, Prot Warriors and TBC could not DPS, even in full DPS gear, compared to a druid in cat form in bear gear. Like, Warriors just didn't hold a candle. They didn't have Bloodthirst. They didn't have Mortal Strike. So when they were dual wielding, they had only Devastate and Heroic Strike were the only abilities I could do. So they didn't hold a candle. So more or less, I would get to main tank, and that came with gear optimization. Now, compared to Bears, Warriors have a lot more work to do on gear optimization. So starting off in phase 5, the 2 pieces of gear I hardly ever removed, just they were always here, no ifs, ands, or buts, was tier 6 plate belt and the Fell Strength leg plates. The belt, just the only thing that I was wearing beforehand was basically PvP belts. I never got the Vosh leather belt, even though that belt was from Vosh, Belt of 100 Deaths, was better for threat overall. Once I got, we missed so many of them, I just decided to let the DPS have it. We were in Black Temple still, only seeing like 3 belts maybe the entire time. So Vindicator's belt was essentially my go-to. Crit rating is insane for Prot Warriors. I regretfully went through a few phases where I was using Bloodlust Brooch more than I should have. It's still a great overall threat increase. The problem with attack power for Prot Warriors is the faster your main hand is, the worse the ratio for attack power is. So basically how just the attack table breaks down is your weapon speed is the multiplier. So if this is your amount of attack power, it'll multiply by this depending on what your main hand is. So the slower your main hand, so this would multiply it by 1.5, the weapon speed or whatever the ratio is. But if you have a slow one, it'll get multiplied by 2.6, 2.7. So you receive a bigger multiplier the slower your weapon is. But for tanking, you want a faster weapon because the baseline threat for Heroic Strike it will outweigh that DPS gain. So unfortunately, I was using more attack power than I would have in the earlier phases, but at the time, like, it really wasn't an issue. We were swimming in shamans. Wind Fury Totem made up for it. There wasn't a whole lot of avenues for replacement for attack power. The only one I can think of is the Heroic Trinket from Blood Furnace, the icon of Unyielding Courage. This would have been insane. I would have been using this for at least 2 phases. At least the first 2 phases, this would have been my trinket of choice. We ran this until I'm pretty sure I reset my DBM counter, but I am almost certain we did about 15, 16 clears of Blood Furnace, and I never saw this once. And if anyone remembers, Blood Furnace was a shit show of a dungeon to just even fully geared. We were all fully geared in phase gear, and that dungeon just absolutely collapsed tanks. It was a nightmare because the mobs would queue up like thrashes. So when you would pull them, they would queue up attacks, and then when they would get to you, they would unleash 3 back-to-back attacks. There were 2 mobs of it, swinging 3 times for like 2k plus each. So as soon as they got to you, they were hitting you for fucking 9k, plus anything else that was with them, plus their normal attacks. And then the healer would basically have to spam heal you, and then now you're losing threat. It was a shit show. So regretfully, I never got that, and it sucked because I would have absolutely been using this trinket. It is insane. Armor pen in phase 1 was amazing. Hit rating, almost 2% hit rating, was huge. Onto the pants, the Fell Strength pants from, I think these are Felmist. She drops DPS pants that you turn into Sunmoot to these, but this is the other item that I never took off. I know there could have been some swaps outside of Brutalis. All this is I'm talking about is outside of Brutalis, because that's just a different boss entirely. So these pants are insane. Highest stam, defense rating, dodge, a shitload of dodge, and a shitload of expertise. These pants are just generally just amazing all around. I could never see myself taking these off outside of just perfect min-max. I need avoidance, I need hit maybe, but I would honestly sacrifice so many other things before these pants just because they offer so much in one slot. So these 2 items, the Onslaught Waistguard and the Fell Strength leg plates, I never took off. They were my tankiness of choice baseline, period. Now, on the other side of it, there's 2 other items that I never took off for threat. So the 2 pieces were the Brutal Gladiator's plate helm and the chest piece. So the plate helm, this PvP in general, all through TBC for a warrior tank, was just absolutely necessary. Resilience scaled like on a 1.4 scale to defense rating. So basically you need less resilience than you would need for defense rating. So resilience got you to crit cap 10 times, just exponentially faster than the same amount of defense rating would. All the gear had crit, stam, and mostly some hit. The hit came more prevalent after phase 2, so phase 3 and 4 of PvP gears, when the hit was really catching up. Hit was absolutely the killer in the earlier phases, but PvP gear was insane. The entire expansion, I ran at least 2 pieces, mainly the chest and shoulders and helmet. Basically, you just want the 2-set bonus of 35 resilience rating. It's just those 2 pieces alone got you more than half of the defense rating, basically, that you needed. It was just an insane amount of crit cap, stam, and crit rating. Crit rating is the king for Prot Warriors in TBC. They wanted as much crit as possible because none of your abilities outside of Devastate, which is only 50% weapon damage, got attack power ratios. Well, and Heroic Strike, but Heroic Strike's off your weapon anyway, so it's just weapon damage plus X. So Shield Slam and Revenge, usually Shield Slam will be your second most threatening ability, Revenge will be your third most threatening, and you could not beef these up with attack power. So Strength was not a very good stat. It was great for Heroic Strike spams if you were being fed all the rage you can use, because again, attack power scales with weapon times weapon speed. So Heroic Strike, it was fine for Heroic Strike and Devastate, but Devastate was your filler spell, so you never really cared kind of what Devastate does. It was just kind of your filler anyway when you couldn't Revenge or Shield Slam. So the best way to increase your threat outside of getting Impale was to get more crit. If your shield slams and revenges were critting, and if you went Impale and they deal 20% bonus critical damage, this threat was pretty insane. So crit was a bigger avenue to obtain threat than strength, or I guess it would be like any other agility. Like agility was just a bad stat in general for prot warriors because the return on it, you needed 33 agility for 1% crit. It was great for dodge as well. Like I didn't ignore it. I still have agility gems, and some of the other previous phase stuff had agility on it. Like where was a good example? I think the shoulders, or like the pants that I wore for a while. The destroyer handguards that were decent for a while had agility. Like agility was fine because it still gave you dodge and still crit. Like it wasn't horrible, but at 33 agility for 1% crit, and you only need like, God, was it 21 crit rating, 22 crit rating for 1% crit? Crit rating was just the king for warriors. Blizzard did them dirty on nerfing agility from 20 agility for 1% crit in Old World to 33 in TBC. It was too much of a scale. I feel like they went too hard on that scale back. They did need it nerfed a little bit, but when you have paladins scaling better for agility, I think they needed 26 agility, 27 agility for 1% crit. And none of their gear has agility on it, I don't think. Like, they hardly ever see agility on their gear, no matter what spec, red or prot. So it was just kind of one of those insulting things. And, like, I think druids only need, like, 22 or 24 agility for 1% crit, and all their gear has agility on it. Blizzard did warriors dirty with the hard agility nerf. So crit rating was king for threat. And then in Phase 3, Season 3 arena gear, Armor Pen was added, and that exponentially increases your threat. Armor Pen was insane for prot warrior threat, depending on how much you got. Executioner was a great enchant for your main hand weapon. It absolutely was the biggest threat enchant over Mongoose, but it always depended on the boss, what gear you were rocking, if any other procs were available, etc, etc. Executioner was the most threatening enchant for your main hand, but it was super dependent. Mongoose, on the other hand, no matter when it procced, no matter what boss, it was always good. It always gave you like 4% crit from the agility and 2% haste and like 2 or 3% dodge. And in the later phases, especially with Sunwell Radiance, the dodge was always warranted. I always wanted the crit. I always felt like I was gaining something when Mongoose procced, compared to when Executioner would proc. It would be me if I had any trinkets that I could pop with it, or else I would never feel a gain, like a threat gain from it whenever it would proc. So then I swapped basically from Executioner back to Mongoose because I wasn't feeling the oomph that I was expecting from it, even though it does sim more threat. But Armor Pen, especially my threat gear right now, I'm rocking 455. But that'll flex with, depending on what boss I'm fighting. So 455 Armor Pen's great. It always depends on the boss, and then all the bosses in Sunwell are casters except for Brutalis. So they basically, after all the Armor Pen debuffs, Expose Armor, Fairy Fire, Curse of Wreck, most of the bosses would only have about 12 to 1600 armor left over. So this essentially, about a quarter of that. So this negates 25% of their armor, just baseline from 455, and that's not even a lot. Like in most of the warrior sets, they have 1200 armor pen baseline plus executioner proc, so they have like 8 to 900 armor pen baseline to just pen all their armor. But armor pen's great because it's just like crit. It allows your shield slam revenges to do more damage without needing attack power, since they don't have attack power ratios. So it's another avenue of threat tanking. So back to the two pieces I never took off. Brutal Plate Helm and the chest piece. Just getting the 2-set resilience bonus Armor pen good, crit good, resilience rating good, hit rating very good. Hit rating has always been, I don't know why Blizzard just refused to give tanks hit rating on a lot of their gear. They guess they didn't want tanks hitting taunt or landing their abilities. So those two pieces absolutely never took off. Now for the necklace, this has shifted a lot through the expansion. Brooch came in phase 3. This is an absolute powerhouse of a necklace that I've rarely shifted. I will shift to Caller of the Pit Lord for extra stam fights, or if I don't need the hit, which I always need the hit. Like even now I'm 0.67 under hit cap with a Fairy Fire debuff on the mob. So even now I could use the hit. So Caller of the Pit Lord was great for extra stam fights. I would use Caller of the Pit Lord on like Caligos, because when you taunt the demon, he just stuns you periodically, and then when you're stunned, you can't dodge, block, or parry, or miss. So you just lose every single amount of avoidance. So you just want as much stam to absorb it and live through it as long as possible. The Braided Eternium Chain I would use for fights in Sunwell where I didn't need to be a tank 100% of the time. A good example was Muru, where I'm only tanking the elementals that come out of the portals. I would throw this on for the hunter and shaman in my group if I had an enhancement shaman. That helps them get the crit rating that they would have if I was a druid. So this only gives them about 1.5-ish% crit chance, so it's not as good as a druid, but it's something plus battle shout. So I'm trying to like make that bridge up. So I would throw this on for Muru, for Kill Jaden. What are some other fights? I think that was mostly what I would do it for. Mother maybe sometimes in the later phases. Basically just trying to help out as much as I can if I wasn't tanking. Pendant of the Titans was an amazing mitigation necklace that I would use if I needed hit cap plus a little more tankiness if I didn't want to use Brooch. So this was great for Brutalis, Calcos. I would use it. Mother was a great one. Like, this is a great all-around trinket that has its niche uses. Choker of the Serrated Blades is another, like, I'm tanking sometimes on KJ and my necklace was on cooldown. I would throw Choker on because you still tank some ads at the beginning and throughout the fight. So this has a lot of stam, a lot of armor pen, because this got me basically armor pen capped on KJ. So I would use this for that fight. But then the Mac Daddy of the expansion, most of the time I would swap to a PvP necklace through each of the phases. So phase 1, 2, and 3, this is Vindicator's phase 3, I would have a PvP necklace. It had the highest stam, shit tons of crit, and resilience rating. A socket as well. Like the socket I used mostly for a green because my meta needs 2 of each gem. So depending on what gear I was rocking, I usually was lacking a yellow, so a crit gem. Because most of the time it's just stam. So I would use that socket to kind of activate my meta. So PvP necklaces were insane. I've used it the entire expansion until about Sunwell, when I would had just Brooch that permanently stayed on, or Caller of the Pit Lord. Absolutely, PvP necks were amazing. Shoulders were kind of a weird spot. Like, shoulders in TBC for a warrior were kind of all over the place. It either was the best thing ever or the worst thing ever. I used, where was it? I used tier 6 shoulders for the longest time, the Onslaught shoulder blades, because it was armor pen, strength, agi, stam, great stats, weights, 2 sockets with crit. These shoulders not only looked great, but they just filled every single threat tanking role I needed. An honorable mention to tier 2 DPS shoulders that I used for a while if I needed hit. Great shoulders, great just stats in general, stam, 2 sockets again, crit and hit rating. I used these for a while just because I needed the hit. I can't stress that enough how starved for hit warriors were. But the other mention was the tanking shoulders. I never saw a second pair. We weren't doing split runs at the time, so I never got to use the tanking shoulders, but I would have used these in Black Temple for some fights. But I never was able to get a second token slot by the time we were doing splits. So defender tokens were just rare in general. We saw billions and billions of heroes, which is funny because most of the Hunter Mage Warlocks, they don't see off-spec play. Like, you only got this shoulder, like it was only one for each of them, but then like this has, you know, DPS, tank, holy DPS, and then the druids healing, feral, boomkin. Like, these were just coveted tokens to have multiple of, and they never dropped.
Be well.
So most of the time, though, I stuck with Pauldrons of Berserking, because this was, again, just another threat slot, since I would have to make up for being a warrior and not getting buffs half the time. These were the insane shoulders that I would have to... Basically, this was my niche slot. This was my DPS slot. And there's not a whole lot of shoulders in Phase 5 that filled this slot as well, that weren't just 100% avoidance. Crimson Paragon Cloak I would use for a majority of the time. This was, again, this dropped in Sunwell, so I wasn't using it until Phase 5. But beforehand in Phase 4 was Dory's Embrace. It's still the best threat tanking cloak. It has all the things you need. Pepe's Shroud was my cloak of choice, though, Phase 3. I never took this off. The hit rating was always there. This was a great mitigation tanking piece. And it's Pepe's, you know, you can't take off Pepe's. But this is another great Brutalis cloak because you still need hit cap for taunts, and the dodge is just mitigation. This is just a great all-around cloak. I need to get this on my Death Knight. Chest pieces, like I said, I never took this off. Basically Onslaught chest guard for Brutalis. That's pretty much it. Bracers was another one that fits with this necklace slot. I used PvP bracers the rest of the game. It was Phase 1 through Phase 2. Or that was pretty much it. I just used PvP bracers. This was another slot where there wasn't a whole lot of tanking options outside of just weird full mitigation bracers that weren't even that good. So another slot that I used for the entire expansion were PvP bracers. In Phase 5, Tier 6 bracers are huge. These are huge mitigation pieces. I put these on for almost every single fight in Sunwell. These are just a beefy slot that outweighs almost anything I could throw in the slot. Plus, getting a socket bonus for just throwing stam in something's always great. Gloves were another threat-oriented option throughout the whole expansion. Borderland Pain Grips is what I'm using now for my threat option because the bracer, or the gloves from Sunwell Trash, have never dropped. The Hardcorian Battle Fists that we have not seen. I would be using these just for the hit rating and haste, because haste isn't bad for when you're full rage capped with Sunwell Radiance always coming in and you're not dodging anything. These would have been great gloves to have, but we never saw them, and I wasn't going to pay someone, you know, $1,000 to just craft them. So I use Borderland Pain Grips now. Still insane gloves. Crit and Armor Pen. Good. But for the most part, in Phase 3 onward, it was Gauntlets of Enforcement. These were... I'll give these the honorable mention of the expansion, that between this and the... Oh, do I even have them anymore?
Open your heart.
I doubt I even have these anymore. No.
Safe journey.
But the leather gloves from Tempest Keep, from Alar. Gloves of Searing Grip. So between Gauntlets of Enforcement and Searing Grips, these are the two gloves that I used the entire expansion. By the time the Gloves of Searing Grips came out, Expertise was super rare, so any expertise a tank can get, they took it. Gauntlets of Enforcement, as soon as that came, warriors were pretty much the only one to use these. Paladins didn't care, so this was Prot Warrior 101. Stam, good, defense rating, expertise, and block value. I would take block value anywhere I could where it matched up perfectly like this to just beef up my shield slams 1-to-1. So definitely Gauntlets of the Enforcement and Gloves of the Searing Grip were just king. I used these almost on everything, never traded them out, bar none. Boots were another weird one as well. Phase 1, I believe I used PvP boots. Phase 2, I think I used PvP boots as well, because there just wasn't really anything outside of hard avoidance boots that I cared about, and I don't even think we saw the ones from High Astromancer. Yeah, Boots of the Resilient I would have used, but I think our Paladin tank was the only one who ever saw these, and they're better for them anyway because they can benefit from the block rating. So, Boots for the most part, when Phase 3 landed, was Myrmidon Treads. These were great dodge, avoidance, tanking boots with hit. So again, hit plus defense rating, always great. I use these a lot. For the most part, though, I use Dread Boots of the Legion. These were my go-to boots in Phase 3 onward. They have hit rating and high stam 2 sockets and crit rating. These were great threat boots. They still have carried me the longest for boots until I got tier 6 boots. Onslaught boots are just like Onslaught belt and pants, the Fell Strength pants. These have all the things you want. Shit tons of stam, defense, dodge, parry, expertise. I use these a lot now. If I need threat, though, I am not afraid to go back to the Dread Boots of the Legion. But the expertise gets me there, gets me avoiding. They are amazing. Rings are a complicated one. I've recently switched to Angelista's Revenge just for the more armor pen because I've been getting robbed of any other shaman buffs, so I've had to make up some threat elsewhere without losing much, and the agility gives me the 1% dodge and crit, plus armor pen and stam. Band of the Abyssal Lord is another king. I've used this so much. This is the ring from Phase 3 onward that I could rely on. Another ring I used for a bit off and on was Band of Eternal Champion. Again, high stam, crit and dodge, and a nice little proc to give you a little oomph from time to time. PvP rings were decent. I will admit they lack in the stam department compared to other rings at the time, but still I definitely have used a PvP ring a ton just for the extra crit and armor pen and resilience if I need to get capped. But Band of the Abyssal Lord basically stayed on. I needed the hit, a lot of stam. And then in Phase 5, Muru, Ring of Hardened Resolved. This is an insane ring all around, more or less for avoidance, more or less for tanky, but the expertise rating plus block value is always warranted. Armor plus bonus armor isn't as great for warriors, obviously, compared to bear. I'm only at 63%-ish mitigation by level for armor, so it's not horrible. Like, I think I get to about 72% with an Iron Shield potion plus a Priest or Shaman critting, so giving me the 25% bonus armor. So really, like, it's not a huge difference, but it's not nothing. And this only gets more valuable when Wrath Talents roll in and you are tanking a lot of things because you have Shockwave and Thunderclap uncapped. Trinkets were trinkets. So for the entire expansion, it was basically Goblin Rocket Launcher lived right here. Until Phase 3 when we got Dark Moon cards, Goblin Rocket Launcher just stayed there. I never changed it. It was always there. I always needed the stam. So that was cemented there. In Phase 5, when we got Magister's Terrace, Commendation of Kael'thas just now lives here in its place. Basically, Prot Warriors always wanted a stam trinket unless they were just trying to parse. If they were just trying to, get a better DPS tank parse. But for the most part, this top trinket would rotate between Solarian Sapphire if I was in a DPS group where I just needed to beef up my attack power for them and still get some stam. Dragonspine trophy for the first few phases lived there. It was great on fights where I was capped on rage. Like, what's a good example? Alar, Keck Reaver, even Kyle. Kyle Thos in TK was a great one. Vosh, it was a good one where you needed to chase threat because that almost 21% increased attack speed on even your fast weapon swings made a world of difference for threat because you could just dump heroic strikes, just go absolutely apeshit. Romulo's Poison Vial was used a lot in this slot for fights I needed hit. I needed a lot of hit throughout this expansion, just swapping my gear in and out, and if I needed 2% hit, this was a no-brainer to swap the trinket one singular slot. Now I'm hit capped. It never procced a lot. It was a very, very rare proc, and even then it didn't do that much threat, so but it's something. But since I didn't get the Blood Furnace hit trinket, I needed something else, and this was it. And then other than that, I used Kiss of the Spider, ironically, at the beginning of the expansion a few times on some fights, but I got to a point where the hit wasn't enough, and if I put the hit into another slot, I would have too much hit, so then the hit on this was wasted, and then 14 crit rating at 0.6 wasn't enough. The use was amazing, but if I didn't need snap threat, if I needed consistent threat, which typically I wanted in this slot was just consistent threat through most of the fights, like what Dragonspine Trophy gives you, just constant procs and keep going, I would end up taking it off, which sucked because this is a great trinket. I loved having this trinket. And phase 3 Madness kind of lived in this slot as well. I needed a lot of hit, I needed a lot of threat, and this procced a lot, and it could refresh itself. So if it procced and it wasn't done yet, it would just refresh and you would get 300 more armor pen. So this was a great trinket for threat. It kind of, I wedged it out for Dark Moon-Carved Vengeance, which kind of lives here now on and off, depending on the fight. For the most part, I just want 2 stam trinkets to be extra beefy warrior. And then I swapped this ring out to this, and then I would swap my cloak out for Dory's Embrace. So like it's kind of like a trade-off in a few slots with min-maxing, playing around with gear. For boss fights, though, it was basically I would try to get as tanky as possible with Kalecgos. Like my Kalecgos loadout was basically as thick as possible. Where's the Borderlands? So then this would be my loadout for Kalecgos. Brutal's Gladiator War Edge, this kind of lived there too. In phase 2, it was the Serpent Shrine Shuriken for the hit. The shield was basically Eldori Legacy Defender until Black Temple, where you get the Mac Daddy of all shields, the Bulwark of Azzinoth. This is the best looking shield in the game. The Cardor spikes, it looks amazing. Unfortunately, the equip doesn't really help warriors a whole lot because they're not getting hit hard enough and fast enough for it. So this is definitely the best you could have wanted. I love this shield. It sucks I didn't get to use it as much, and I have to use this stupid ass fucking beetle shield now. But oh well. The one-handers were another item of contention from like basically the first 2 phases. I only was using the Thrallmar Exalted Axe, the Warbringer. This was basically the axe I used for the first 2 full phases because I didn't see a single weapon in phase 1 or 2. There wasn't anything in phase 1. The Warbringer was bis for phase 1, but phase 2 we saw 2 of the Lurker Maces, the Mallet of Tides, and that was like almost 2 months into the phase. Like I was so hurting by the time I got my Mallet of Tides for a weapon. Like it was scary how fast the DPS got geared compared to me just getting this fucking weapon. So it sucked for that phases, and then in phase 3 it was obviously the Brutalizer. This was great because I'm an orc. Axe is good. Axe is very good. I use this a ton. I have 2. One as Mongoose, the other is Executioner for dual wielding like Hydros and Keck Reaver. These were just kings. And then for the fights where I need a chase threat, like on Blood Boil or Supremus, I would use Rising Tide Axe with another axe. I would just dual wield, just try to chase and just spam Devastate. Because Devastate's great, efficient threat when you have a slow one-hander. And then in phase 5, it went to Dragon Scale, Encrusted Longblade. Sucks that it's a sword, but all good tanking stats, and it's super, super fast. But basically for Kalecgos, this would be my setup. I just want as much stam as possible. For Brutalis, it was all the avoidance possible. I went for Morrow's Lucky Pocket Watch because at the time, I didn't have the foresight to get Scarab of Displacement from SSC. Because this, I believe, has less avoidance on the equip compared to Morrow's Lucky Pocket Watch. I'd have to do the math again. I think Morrow's Lucky Pocket Watch overall gives a little bit more raw avoidance compared to the Scarab of Displacement, but Scarab of Displacement's activation gives about 2.5 to 3% more total avoidance than the activation from Pocket Watch. But basically, these are great. This is the trinket I use for Brutalis for when I tank the first stomp. It's just hands down, I just don't want to get hit, and this is the way you do it. And then everything else is just raw, pure avoidance. Crown of Dothramar, Tier 6 Shoulders, Pendant of Titans, Pepe's, like, you just want to avoid. Just avoid, 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 avoid. It goes to the Druid tank first. You just sit there and you just want to avoid. If I wanted to min-max, I could have had, like, I believe there was some pants I could have thrown on, like, Praetorians, maybe. But basically, it was just, oh, it has more avoidance? Throw it on. This is your Brutalis set. For Felmist, Felmist would change week to week because of how Corrosion works, and you just take 100% more damage from time to time, but I would be robbed of just a basic enhancement shaman from time to time. I would basically rock something like this. This would kind of be like the more or less setup I would have. It's like a weird in-between. You want to be tanky, but I still needed to be threatening because I still had to race the DPS on Felmist, and then, they can throw stuff on him while he's in the air. The dooms are going off while they're in the air, and you're just sitting there spamming Battle Shout, hoping you hit the hunters and all the hunter pets for increased threat. For basically the fights going on, Twins, it was a mix, but you threw on a PvP trinket to negate the conflag. And then it's just basically Muru, it's a full tankiness, just full stam, because those elementals, just their basic attacks hit fucking hard. They hit chunky, you just want to get chonk. And then KJ, I would mix it up for almost all DPS gear, because I'd be in a dragon so often, the bear's tanking, and I just need to be DPSing, and the chances I do get, maybe pick up and add a reflection when it spawns, but other than that, it was just full DPS gear, doing what I can to help out. But for Felmist, it was always the real contention. It was, how do I basically put this where I need to be? Like, so this was kind of exactly where I wanted to be for Felmist. You have a lot of stam, a lot of avoidance, but you still have some major threat pieces in Borderland Pain Grips, the 2 PvP pieces, your cloak, and your expertise capped. So this is kind of what I rocked for Felmist, and even without a shaman, this is one of the threat charts where I didn't have an enhancement shaman, it was just a resto shaman. And this is like my threat chart, and I still can stay ahead of all the other DPS below me, even without a shaman or a feral druid, and only having Mr. X and hunter buffs. So I had like 6% damage, but big whoop, you're in defensive stance, you have minus 10% damage. So this still even shows that as long as you can gear correctly, warriors can still out-threat everyone when bears are the quote-unquote king. So this is just, don't listen to the internet. This is obviously one example of me not having any DPS buffs outside of baseline strength of the earth totem, and that's it. Oh, and then agility totem. So strength of earth and agility totem, and that's it. No wind fury, no crit buff, no ret paladin aura, nothing. This is me working with essentially myself, and I can still stay ahead of the DPS. And then this is when she goes into the air. So basically we killed her in the air, I think, on this attempt. So this was all the threat. That didn't matter because as soon as she lands, she dies. But this is just shows you, like, it's warriors can do it. Like, there was nothing that said warriors couldn't do it. It was just the internet regurgitating. I can go through even more logs too and show, like, I will always like ride this line, like the distance from me and then the second inline DPS. Like, I want to ride this line because if I'm way out here, where basically I'm blowing the DPS out of the water for threat, but I'm just getting chunked on tanking. Like, you want to ride this line, and this was like my bread and butter. I loved just riding this line. I want to have just enough threat to stay ahead to the DPS can race and not feel throttled. But I don't want to be so DPS oriented that I'm just getting crushed and the healers just have to spam max rank greater heals to keep me up. So this is just perfect. Like, and this is without buffs, which most of the time I did not have most of the buffs, even in Enhancement Shaman, which sucked, but you have to make do. And I loved that I was able to make do, and I still can't believe how I did it on some attempts between like Zappering and Gift of the Arthas procs and Judgment of Light procs and even Earth Shield. Even if the Narati and all the other Resto Shamans were great and kept up Earth Shield, it can be a great threat ability. Like, this could even beat out Revenge on a lot of attempts. So it's just get good, learn how to gear orient, and it's basically the rundown. It was a great time trying to fucking get it out there, but I loved every bit of it. But then I have to flex on the tier 6. But that was pretty much it. I hope I covered everything and didn't forget much. So